Hello, my Bill 5000 Nation. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully, everyone's having a great day. If not, I hope it gets better from here. We are back with a new MrBallen video. This one is titled Brazilian Government Kept This Paranormal Case a Secret for Years. Sorry, I'm trying to get through it a little fast. I'm not feeling all that great today. Alright. I'm excited for today's story. If you guys are excited as I am, go ahead. Turn them lights down low. Put on something comfy, couple, someone special. Ooh. Let's get a little creepy. Paranormal. Let's get a little creepy.
Today's story is about a disturbing discovery made in Brazil in the 1980s. Now, at the time, the Brazilian government attempted to hide this story, saying it was just too sensitive for the public to know about it. But eventually, photos of this discovery were leaked, and it sent Brazil into a panic. Now, I'm not going to show you any of the actual leaked photographs because they're just too graphic, but I will be describing them in some detail towards the end of this video, so viewer discretion is advised. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please offer the like button a can of soda, but be sure you secretly, violently shake it before you hand it over. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads.
It is fun.
Okay,
now,
let's get into today's story.
I'll go ahead and say it. It is not fun whenever you do it, and it's the old lady's last can of Mountain Dew. There will be death. You just don't want none of that. Just don't do it, people. Just don't do it.
On the afternoon of September 29th, 1988, a 10-year-old boy named Francisco was walking along the perimeter of a man-made lake in southern Brazil while poking the ground with his stick. Francisco was doing one of his favorite after-school activities, which was looking for bugs. And this lake, which was a part of the Billings Reservoir in the Brazilian state of São Paulo, was his favorite place to do that. And the reservoir was gigantic, but it was not shaped like a typical circular lake. Instead, it was more like a big river that kind of wound around and had all these skinny branches kind of jutting off the sides of it. And on this particular day, Francisco was walking along one of those skinny offshoots of this lake, where at certain points, if Francisco wanted to, he could literally swim to the other side of the lake in a matter of minutes. Now, Francisco knew he was not really supposed to be anywhere near this reservoir, because in recent years, gangs from the nearby cities would bring their murder victims out to this reservoir and bury them here. And so locals knew it was not a safe place and to stay clear. But Francisco, he didn't listen to any of that because he loved walking around this lake and looking for bugs. And so he thought, you know what? No one's harmed me yet, so what's the big deal? And so as Francisco...
Oh, man. You gotta love kids and their trusting stupidity. Blind stupid? Kids can be stupid, people. You gotta love them, though. Oh, shit. I've been taking candy from strangers for years, and I'm fine.
Casually walked along, poking at the mud, looking for his bugs. He finally saw one. It was a huge water scorpion, almost 2 inches long, and so immediately Francisco, without taking his eyes off the bug, drops his backpack, grabs a clear container that he kept in the side pocket, he opened it up, he bent down, and he scooped up this water scorpion and capped it, and then he brought the container up and looked inside to kind of admire his new pet. And as he was staring at this container, he noticed something odd on the other side of the lake. He basically saw it through the plastic container, and so he lowered the container to get a better look at this strange thing on the other side of the water, and what he saw was this big group of vultures all kind of standing in a circle right on the water's edge. And immediately, Francisco was way more interested in these vultures than in his bug, because vultures meant there had to be a dead thing nearby, because vultures are scavengers. And so whatever they were circled around was probably a dead animal. But Francisco, he looked around.
It's probably a dead body, but it's not a dead animal. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The gang people murdered someone, and they just got... Maybe they're on lunch. Maybe they're coming back to finish burying them.
And realized there was no way to get to the other side of the water to see whatever this dead thing was unless he swam. and he knew if he went back home with soaking wet clothes, his mom would
fucked.
know he had snuck to the reservoir and he'd be in lots of trouble. And so, feeling really frustrated, Francisco just picked up a rock and chucked it to the other side, trying to splash the water near the vultures to get them to fly away so he could see the dead thing. But the first rock he threw did not really have an effect. The vultures just kind of turned around and looked at him and then went back to whatever was on the ground.
We hungry, bruh. That thing ain't gonna do shit.
And so Francisco gathered a big pile of like 25 rocks and began throwing them one after the other at these vultures. And finally, Francisco had caused enough chaos on the other side of the water that the vultures got upset and they took to the air and they flew away. And finally, Francisco got a clear view of the dead thing that was in the middle of the circle of vultures. Now, initially, Francisco thought this dead thing was going to be maybe a bird or some other small animal from the area, but when he got a good look at this dead thing from 30 feet away, it didn't look like either of those things. It didn't have fur, it didn't have feathers, it actually looked kind of pale, almost like a pig. But Francisco's thinking to himself, why would a pig be all the way out here? And then it slowly dawned on Francisco that what he was looking at was actually a dead person. Suddenly terrified, Francisco scooped up his things, turned around, and ran to the nearest village where he began screaming for help. Within a few hours, the area along the water where the vultures had been and where this body was swarming with police and also with curious villagers. Normally, when a body was discovered in or near this reservoir, which unfortunately happened quite a bit because of all the recent gang violence, police would often break ranks from the investigation and walk over to the local onlookers and kind of fill them in and tell them, who this person was and what they think happened. But this time, it was totally different. The police were totally secretive, and it was really obvious. The police immediately roped off the entire area with crime scene tape, and then the police...
Is it someone important? I'm just asking because normally if it's something like that, then it's like someone important, like someone important's kid or loved one or something. I don't know. It's an alien. It's an alien body. This is Brazil, right?
Police officers stood in a circle, shoulder to shoulder, blocking the view of the villagers so they couldn't see the body. And then when villagers actually walked up to police and said, hey, can you tell us what's going on? The police would say they couldn't talk about it, and then they would tell the villagers to back up and stay away. Locals would stick around for a while, being treated this way the entire time by police, and then finally when the sun started to go down and it was clear the police were very committed to hiding what was going on, whoever was still there finally just left, figuring when they got home they could just turn on the news and see what had happened.
Did you see the news there while you was there, bruh? If you didn't see the news there, it ain't gonna be on the news. It is a government cover-up. It says so right there. Brazilian cover. It's probably like Bigfoot.
With this dead person. But when they got home and turned on their TV, there was not one news
There's no Bigfoots in Brazil. I don't know why I said Bigfoot.
story about this body. And at a minimum, this story should have dominated local news, but it somehow was not being talked about. And then even
That's
stranger was the next morning when locals got up, they headed back to the reservoir to see what the police were up to. And when they got there, they found the police were gone, the body was gone, and there was absolutely no trace that anyone or anything had ever been there. It was like it had been totally sanitized. For days, locals in this area continued to check the TV news, they checked the radio, the newspapers for some story, some bit of information about this dead body that was found. But again, there was just absolutely nothing. And it just made no sense. Why wasn't anyone talking about this? And so eventually, in the absence of any official information about what happened, a rumor began to circulate among locals that the body belonged to a local fisherman who had gone missing 3 days before Francisco discovered him. And this fisherman, apparently he was an alcoholic, and he had gone to the reservoir, and he had begun drinking, and apparently...
But why would an alcoholic fisherman dead on the beach be something worth hiding? That's like a Tuesday, right? Fishermen drink. I'm not saying that in a mean way, but like fishermen drink. Gotta keep yourself warm them cold sea nights, my friend. Why I'm calling bullshit.
He drank so much that it killed him. Now, many people wondered, if this drunk fisherman story was the real story, then why were the police so secretive about the body, and why weren't they willing to give up any information to the crowd about what had happened to this guy? I mean, a drunk fisherman is not a super sensitive thing. It just seemed like that doesn't line up with the police's behavior. But questions like these remained unanswered, and after several weeks of still no new information, no news coverage anywhere, even the most skeptical of villagers who really thought there's something weird going on here, they just kind of forgot about it and moved on. Until 6 years later, in 1994, when someone, we don't know who, from the Brazilian government decided they just couldn't keep the secret any longer. And so they gathered up some photos and an autopsy report they were not supposed to have, and they smuggled those things to the media. And once the media published these things, it became immediately clear that the dead man who was found in the reservoir in 1988 was not a drunk fisherman who drank himself to death. Nor was he the victim of gang violence. Instead, it appeared that this person's death could potentially be paranormal.
And you put a commercial there, you ass.
If you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format,
that's why we're here.
Then you gotta listen to the brand new Ballen Studios podcast called Bedtime Stories. For the uninitiated, Bedtime Stories has been a long-standing, incredible YouTube channel that puts out just some of the best dark, scary storytelling on the internet. And now they're making this brand new podcast in collaboration with our studio. So if you want some more incredible storytelling to add to your weekly roster of content, go to any podcast platform anywhere and search for Ballen Studios and click on Bedtime Stories. They put out new episodes every single Wednesday. Here's a clip from this week's episode called Without a Trace.
The northwestern state of Alaska remains one of America's most unsettled and unexplored regions. It is a place of wonder and mystery, but also of great danger, with roughly 2,500 people going missing there every year. And one settlement, situated far to the west of the state, remains the setting for some of the most bizarre of these disappearances. Bedtime Stories.
But before we dive into the significance of those leaked photos and the leaked autopsy report, you need to understand a weird aspect of Brazil's history. Brazil has an absolutely astounding number of sightings of unidentified flying objects, or UFOs for short.
Yes,
and these are not your typical UFO stories where some person claims they saw aliens or they were abducted by aliens, but they have no witnesses, they have no proof, they have nothing but their own story. No, in Brazil, the bulk of their UFO sightings are reported by their military, because Brazil actually has a government program to monitor UFO sightings because it happens so much in their country. In fact, the Brazilian government was directly involved in one of the most famous UFO sightings of all time. It was called the Night of the UFOs. This famous sighting, or sightings, because it actually happened in 4 different Brazilian states simultaneously, happened on May 19th, 1986, which was 2 years before
Yeah. I like alien stuff. I knew Brazil was really big into aliens. They have some of the highest numbers of UFO sightings there is. And that doesn't just mean it has to be alien. It's just an unidentified object. It doesn't have to be alien. It just, they don't know what it is. But it's alien. We all know it's alien. So, yay. I love aliens and zombies and big feet. Get into some good shit when you cover any of them.
Francisco spotted the dead body in the reservoir. On that 1986 day, at around 8:15 p.m.,
They found an alien.
An air traffic controller at an international airport in Sao Paulo noticed 3 red lights hovering over the airport, and so the controller called it in and asked, what are these things? But nobody knew. And at the exact same time, all across Brazil, dozens and dozens of other people who have no idea what's happening at this international airport began reporting that they too were seeing strange lights in the sky. And many of these reports of these lights were coming from military personnel and government officials. And so this was like a really big deal that like all across Brazil, everybody's seeing lights in the sky. And so the government, in response to this, scrambled their fighter jets and sent the jets up to try to intercept one of these sets of lights, just to see who or what they were and potentially shoot them down if they had to. But when these jets got anywhere close to these unidentified flying objects, these lights in the sky, these UFOs would move away like instantly. One UFO was observed suddenly disappearing and then reappearing 20 miles away in just 5 seconds, which meant that UFO had to travel at least 5 times the speed of sound to cover that distance in such a short amount of time. For reference, humans are not capable of going that fast. We cannot do that.
Can't we, MrBallen? Yeah, can't we? Oh, I don't know. I'm just saying. I mean, we probably can't. We don't know. I mean, the government hides some shady shit, evidently. So how are we supposed to know, MrBallen?
Eventually, the night of the UFOs ended when all these UFOs, these lights in the sky, just kind of suddenly vanished. And then a couple of days later, the Brazilian government held this big press conference about the event, and they would say, we have no idea what those lights were or where they came from. We have no clue. However, whoever or whatever was controlling these UFOs showed obvious signs of intelligence. Now, as mind-blowing as that would be to hear that potentially intelligent creatures are flying around your airspace.
It's just a Thursday.
Remember, this is Brazil, where UFO sightings were kind of...
It is up there as often as finding drunk fishermen on the beach. One's a Monday, one's a Tuesday.
the norm, and so people were definitely shocked by this. This was a terrifying thing, but they just kind of accepted what they were told and assumed, the government will handle this, and people moved on with their lives. That is, until several years later in 1994, when those photos and the autopsy report of the dead person in the reservoir were leaked, and then suddenly the people of Brazil, they're seeing this stuff and they're realizing, wait a minute, the night of the UFOs may not have been an isolated instance. Those UFOs may never have left. Here is what the public learned from the leaked photos and the leaked autopsy report. Back in 1980,
Bro, I'm going to go ahead and say I have seen War of the Worlds. They never leave. They go underwater. They go underground. They have sexual relations with other people to have more alien, half hybrid babies born throughout the centuries. That way, they're always here. There's aliens everywhere. Lizard people live in the sewers in New York.
when little Francisco spotted the dead body from the other side of the water, he correctly identified that it was a man's body. But Francisco had been wrong when he told authorities that it didn't look like this guy had any visible injuries on him. And the guy was naked, and so Francisco felt pretty confident that he would have seen something if the guy was wounded. But when the police arrived and they saw the body up close, they immediately saw he had several very serious and very strange physical injuries. He had these 4 perfectly circular 1 to 1.5 inch diameter holes drilled into his body. There were 2 right above his chest, basically sitting above his armpit. There was one that was right over his belly button, so his belly button was gone. It was just a hole where it had been. And there was also one in his crotch. And these holes were not crudely done. These were done with surgical precision, almost like whoever had done it.
What is with aliens and putting stuff in our butts and holes in our cooches and crotches and everything? And man, we got enough shit going on down there. We don't need people doing more. Unless you're into that kind of thing, then, yeah. But fuck.
was using high-end medical tools to make these cuts. Now, at first glance, the authorities had no idea why these holes were on this guy's body. But when the autopsy was done, they discovered this man was missing the majority of his internal organs, and after doing some investigating, they discovered that all of his organs had literally been vacuumed out of him through these holes on his body. Those holes were basically just ports to pull things out of him. Also, most of the man's blood had been suctioned out of those holes as well. But that wasn't all. The man also had one of his ears removed.
And he became like a fucking human smoothie. Like they just... His milkshake brought all the aliens to the yard.
His eyes was removed, and the lower part of his face was also removed. And again, all of these cuts looked like they had been made with absolute surgical precision. But perhaps the most brutal aspect of all the things that came to light when these documents were leaked was something that, unless you looked really closely at the autopsy report, you wouldn't necessarily notice. And it had to do with this man's vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve is something that controls part of your nervous system that's responsible for automatic functions like heart rate and digestion. And so when your body is suddenly in great distress, like suddenly you're fighting for your life or something, your vagus nerve can basically shut off those automatic functions like digestion in order to ensure all your energy is going towards fighting for your life. But in this dead man's case, his autopsy revealed that his vagus nerve had gone absolutely wild right at the moment of his death. It's complicated, but this suggests that this man was very likely alive when his face was being surgically cut off, and those holes were being drilled into his body, and his organs were being vacuumed out.
Oh, fuck.
And then at some point, the excruciating pain that came from these horrible things happening to him got so bad, his vagus nerve basically turned off his heart. So it was not these horrible physical injuries that killed him. He literally died from the pain of these physical injuries. In short, his body basically killed itself to avoid feeling the pain it was feeling. So I'm sure you're wondering, how does the dead man in the reservoir and these leaked photos and the autopsy report, how does all of that connect with the night of the UFOs, which happened 2 years before the man in the reservoir was even found? Well, following the night of the UFOs in 1986, farmers in Brazil who lived in the areas where these famous sightings took place began reporting that their cattle were dying kind of inexplicably. And this began happening with enough frequency in all of these areas where the UFO sightings had taken place that a theory began to develop in Brazil that maybe the UFOs that were here during the night of the UFOs
They like
have
cheeseburgers.
something to do with all these cows turning up dead. And as that theory began to take hold all across Brazil,
Hamburger. They want an hamburger.
that, UFOs are killing our cattle, another theory began to come out of that one, which was, well, if the UFOs are coming in here and killing cattle, what's stopping them from killing people? And then in 1988, so 2 years after the night of the UFOs, and right in the middle of all these farmers all across Brazil saying their cows were dying for no reason, the dead man in the reservoir was discovered. And as soon as the government saw the physical condition this guy was in, with the weird holes drilled in his body and his organs missing and his face pulled off, that, plus the fact that he was located in this reservoir, which by the way was in a night of the UFO sighting area, the government decided they would have to hide the story. A critical detail that I have left out intentionally until right now is that the cattle who were turning up dead, they were turning up dead with circular holes drilled into their bodies, with organs missing, and parts of their faces removed. Meaning, clearly, whatever was happening to these cattle inside of these sighting areas
It never left.
had happened to this man in the
It
reservoir.
never left.
And if that got out
I seen World of Worlds, bro. I'm telling you. They underground, they in the water. They won't pop up out someone's butthole. You'd never know. Lizard people live in the sewers of New York. They're everywhere, bro. I've watched Men in Black. I know things, man.
to the public, then it would confirm for many people in Brazil that, yep, The UFOs, they're the ones going after the cattle, and now they're going after us too. And so this was why the police were so secretive about the body and not letting anybody see it or learn anything about it. And it was also why no news was run anywhere in Brazil about the story. It's because the government was really trying to make sure it did not get out. And the government was able to keep it quiet until 1994, when those photos and the autopsy report were leaked. But like all things having to do with UFOs or aliens or paranormal stuff, it's like despite the evidence, those things very quickly are pushed into the kind of conspiracy theory bucket, and they stay there. People do not want to touch that category. So even though Brazil remains
Nobody wants other people to think they're crazy. I'm fucking crazy. I believe in aliens.
an absolute hotbed for UFO sightings. Wikipedia even has a page dedicated just to tracking Brazilian UFO sightings. Despite all that, no one really cares. But if you care, there is an unbelievable amount of information online about what's going on in Brazil. And if nothing else, it is just a fascinating rabbit hole to fall into.
Yeah, I love rabbit
So
holes.
that's going to do it. If you enjoyed today's story, be sure to check out our podcast called the MrBallen Podcast, where we have literally hundreds more stories just like this one, many of which are only available on the podcast. Again, it's called the Mr.
Yep. All right, everyone. That was a good one. I like that. Aliens. Alien versus Predator. No. I love alien stuff. It's so much fun. All right, I really enjoyed today's story. If y'all enjoyed today's story as much as I did, please go down there, leave a thumbs up. While you're down there, go on over, hit that subscribe button, become part of the Bill 5000 Nation. We do some crazy shit here, bruh. As always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Man, what if the aliens are just living among them? Just right there, right behind them, in the dark corners of their homes, waiting for them to go to sleep so they can suck their crotches. That didn't...